Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Today's guest is Carol Hamilton of Grace Social Sector Consulting. In her work, Carol has developed a process to close the gaps between nonprofits' external missions and their internal capacities to realize their missions. She calls this process Wholistic Effectiveness, or WE. Her work in organizational development, strategic planning, facilitation, and program evaluation for nonprofits is analytical and very well thought out. She acts as the nonprofit's strategic collaborator. She also hosts an outstanding podcast, Nonprofit Mission Impact. I'm pleased to have Carol as our guest today. Carol, welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So let's dive right into this because capacity for nonprofits is one of my favorite subjects.
Absolutely.
So you've developed this process you call Holistic Effectiveness. I like the we thing part of that, I might add. So tell us a little bit about that and tell us what you see as the real difficulties in moving organizations to fully understand this external mission thing with their actual capacity to achieve these ideas, these concepts, their mission.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in there. The holistic effectiveness kind of came from a number of conversations that I was having with folks about kind of how I approach the work. And it was really recognizing that there's some people who are very analytical. There's some people who are very in their feelings. And I have my foot in both worlds, if you will, and my background in organization development is all about how can people work together more effectively so that that collaboration, how do organizations, not just, each individual stay in their lane and stay in their silo, which, staying in your lane can be important, but sometimes you need to play a different game than swimming. And so it's, you gotta integrate a little bit more. So bringing both sides, I think our culture in the US tends to favor that analytical side. And so I think more and more people are recognizing, we don't leave our human feelings at the door if we show up at the Zoom room or the boardroom or the session for whatever planning we're doing, or when people are going to the office, they don't leave any of that parts behind. They may put up barriers and masks depending on the culture of the organization, of like how accepting folks are of that or how people define professionalism. But it's just really recognizing that whatever you're doing, when you're working with groups of people, and that's essentially what organizations are, they're networks of people bring their whole selves to it.
And from your experience then, how do you determine an organization's capacity to navigate the changing world that we find ourselves in these days?
Oh my goodness, and it's changing rapidly. Although I think I was thinking about it today, and it feels like, there's kind of this hurricane, right, happening at the surface, but many of the things that are driving that hurricane, in this analogy, have been those currents for a long time. But I think one of the things that is a challenge for nonprofits and associations is that the push over many decades has been do more with less, do more with less, do more with less, and that stretches everybody to their limit and doesn't leave much flexibility, there's not much margin there to be able to respond effectively to all the things that are coming at folks. And of course, they're coming at folks at a rapid pace these days.
Well, organizations, I'm sure you see this, struggle with the difference between their day-to-day operations and their long-term strategies. All well intended, usually,
Absolutely.
but they're so busy with today that they forget about tomorrow. I'm wondering, as you work with leaders and think about their building institutional capacity, what do you see as the problem that they're not fully taking into consideration as they try to balance this between the today and the tomorrow?
Right, right. Well, I think a couple different things. I think it kind of depends on the organization, um, in terms of, is the focus on the day to day because they haven't built systems to manage those things effectively, so they're constantly putting out internal fires? Is it complacency of we've always done it this way? Um, and kind of head in the sand of I'm not gonna pay attention to things, all the wider environment, to be able to see the ways in which I'm gonna need to adapt. Um, so I think each organization's gonna have some different reasons for those, but I just think all of us, we're in an age of information and disinformation overload. There's so much coming at us that, there's this culture of busyness. There's this culture of, over functioning. And so it's so easy to get caught up in that busyness and not take the time to just step back and, as a group, think longer term and even try to pay attention to what might those signals be of what's coming down the pike.
Are there any particular issues that you see that kind of impact most organizations in this context?
Well, I think just the rapid pace of change these days. I mean, I think, it's only becoming more so. I think that's impacting everybody. And, and, I think the big difference is, does the organization feel stable in terms of its funding or not? I think that's a big differentiator. You know, what's their purpose? What's their long-term mission? Are they serving a particular field? And what's the trajectory of that field? Is that a field that's positioned to stay around for, the longer term? We've seen so much change over both of our careers in terms of, the types of jobs that have disappeared, become obsolete. So there are lots of different things that impact, but I think it's for leaders and for each individual, really giving themselves some time to actually step away from that raging river of stuff and actually slow down and take a beat and try to think bigger picture.
I'm very intrigued by something you said a few minutes ago about, doing more with less. And this has been such a long-term mantra for the organizations. And now, that, as you were saying, stretched everybody so thin that they're not able to create more and more capacity to do the work. Can you expand on that a little more?
Well, I feel like, we've been talking for a while now about, just a pervasive sense of burnout in the nonprofit sector. And I think it comes from that, of folks having, there's whatever organization you have, whatever mission you have, there's probably always something more that you could be doing to move that mission forward. Every nonprofit person that I've worked with is ambitious and is creative, and they want to pursue that mission. They want to, move things forward. And so the tendency to add to the plate, to the to-do list, but not necessarily adding capacity to support that and having no redundancy in the system.
Mhm. So, what role do you think culture plays in the organization's ability to adapt and remain effective during these very disruptive times?
Yeah, I think culture plays a huge part because, if the organization has a very kind of traditional top-down hierarchical structure, it's not going to be able to move as fast. Likely, it's going to be a place where, making mistakes, you know, is frowned upon. I mean, obviously, no one wants to make any mistakes, but if you have a culture where mistakes are punished, people are not going to be willing to try new things, experiment, pivot. It just seems too risky, right? So it's going to create that kind of very risk averse culture. And so all the things that we talk about in terms of agility and flexibility and pivoting and experiments, none of that's possible. Innovation, none of that's possible when people are afraid that if they try something new, something bad will happen to them.
So, as you work with associations on their strategic planning, um, are you trying to help them, or do they rethink the entire process because of their need to adapt to a more disruptive time? Or is it something we kind of just talk about, but boy, let's get back to what we're doing right now?
That's a great question. I mean, I've had to pivot in terms of how I'm, just facilitating retreats, right? So I was doing one last week with a colleague, and we started with scenario planning, where we helped the group identify, okay, because we're in such an atmosphere of uncertainty, what are the biggest levers of uncertainty in your work? And then let's plot out what would, and you could do more than four scenarios, you could do more than two poles of uncertainty, but that was enough for folks to say, okay, what does that look like in each of those arenas, and what might we be able to do about it if that were to come to fore? So helping people, it's not an exercise of trying to predict the future. But I think, as you had said on the when you came onto my podcast, you were talking about anticipating the future, and I think it's just, it's kind of like, I think of scenario planning like a fire drill, right? Like nobody wants to have the fire that is, but you practice anyway because you want that muscle memory to be ready when the thing happens. And so I think that's the kind of thing. And then helping people think about what's within their sphere of control. What are all the things that are going to impact you, but you may not have control over? So where do you find your agency within that so that you can take steps and not feel paralyzed by the fact that things feel so uncertain?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of using scenario planning to get the mind uh,
Yes.
running. I think that's a really important thing. I wanted to ask you, from your experiences, do you see things that distinguish organizations that thrive when the uncertainty occurs versus those that, oh my God, the world just came to an end?
That's a great question, and I think, unfortunately, in a couple years, we'll see the fruits of that, and we may not know now which is which. But I do think that those organizations that are somewhat calm in their work will be better suited to weather these storms. If you're already frantic inside your organization and you haven't even thought about what's going on beyond you, you're not even managing your own process, and you're getting in your own way of creating unnecessary drama, I think those organizations will struggle.
Are there some what we might call common blind spots that you see when you work? Not because, I should say this ahead of that question. I think most boards are loaded with really good people and often very intelligent people. Whether or not they're board members in the sense that everybody would like is another story. But are there some particular blind spots that you have witnessed that seem to kind of, just come up time after time after time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been blessed that I've worked with a lot of organizations that I feel like, the board and staff have a good sense of, how they contribute. And they're trying, they're really doing a good job of not getting in each other's way, but really collaborating and partnering. Um, but I think if you have too many of the same profession, the same identities, the same backgrounds, you don't have any diversity of thought, of lived experience, of professional background, then it's easy to fall into groupthink. And it's easy, and that sounds really bad, groupthink. Well, basically, anybody, you're always operating with assumptions. And the more, as long as you've worked through how to work together well, the more diversity you have in the room, there's going to be more opportunity to question those assumptions. Um, and not just, well, of course it's XYZ because I learned that in graduate school or whatever it was. So I think that can help. And yeah, every person has blind spots. We can't live without them.
Oh, sure.
We'd be so overwhelmed by the information coming in from the outside world, we wouldn't be able to get up every
And,
day.
and there sure is a lot coming in on us these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of my experience is that capacity building in many organizations is often associated with, structures and systems and so forth. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how important is staff well-being, volunteer well-being, those kind of engagements that may not always be talked about in the same voice?
Well, I think they go hand in hand. I mean, it's people that create those systems, and people need to remember that too, right? When it's like getting written down on a piece of paper, then people think it's like some kind of, holy script, and it's not. It can be changed, but I think one of the blind spots is assuming that people can keep going forward without taking care of each other, of staff, of volunteers. If it's all about short-term gain and that you're just going to be, contributing to that burnout, which doesn't contribute to the long-term sustainability of the organization. So they really, I think they're very interconnected.
Well, how can associations create an environment where employees and volunteers feel genuinely empowered to contribute to the whole idea of building institutional capacity?
Well, I think, involving people, engaging people, not just assuming it's the board's job to make all the decisions or the board's job and one, or two leadership team folks. And folks, I think, get afraid of that because they think of the kind of cacophony of voices. But, how do you tack back and forth between, gathering input, synthesizing that, making a decision, sending it back out to, the rest of everybody to say, this is what we did based on your feedback. It takes discipline, but I think that without that, you can order people around for a while, but that doesn't work in the long term.
You're absolutely right about that. So, what trends do you see that are shaping the future of organizational capacity building?
Well, I think right now, I mean, there's so much uncertainty around funding streams, and you know, the politicization of some basic work around, helping groups work together better and include all the people that are there. There's so many things, other trends. Um, I think it's in these times when things are very uncertain and there's a lot of anxiety. It's easy to kind of get very risk averse, and it makes it more difficult for folks to make decisions.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I've been looking at, and I'd love your perspective on this, and that's the impact of the advances in technology. I mean, they come so fast, and you no sooner install one thing and there's something that's a lot better, or it doesn't quite cover exactly what you think. And of course, technology is a capacity builder.
Right.
But what do we say to these smaller associations who are even more resource poor than
Sure.
other organizations when it comes to, let's take specifically technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think about just how I've approached it as a small business, right? There's some things that I keep using. There may be a better, shinier tool out there, but I know that the opportunity cost for me would be learning that, migrating over all the things. And then there are times when I do choose to change tools because I see something better, it's less expensive, it's going to work better for me. So probably if I were being really smart about it, I would create some kind of decision-making tool for myself that would, you know, these are the, questions that we ask when we think about whether we're going to change systems, adopt a new technology, all of those things. I mean, obviously AI is, just even from I had George Weiner on from Whole Whale
Ah,
just a year ago to talk about AI, and so much has changed even just in this time, right? And people's adapting it, adopting it, and he's saying now it's become a commodity in just a year, and it's really about the training internally, that internal capacity that we've been talking about, of how are you using it, how are you making it work for you. And then, from my point of view, not operating under the illusion that you will actually save time by using it. Because my observation, and I think there's research that I can quote, is that again, we're really smart. And so we think of we go to the long list of back burner projects that are higher level, probably, right? Longer term, more strategic. So hopefully people can kind of shift to those longer term, more strategic tasks and away from the more mundane ones. But I don't see people working less hours because of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's exactly true. Well, if you could give, the proverbial best advice to advance association leaders trying to strengthen their organizational capacity, particularly with the uncertainties that we've discussed here today, what might that be, or generally, what would it be that you would recommend to them?
Well, I'll be honest, I'm leery of giving people advice because I know I don't accept advice very well myself. But I'll tell you what I'm trying to do for myself as I try to ground myself in this kind of chaotic environment that we're in. Just coming back to the basics of, am I taking care of myself? Am I taking care of the people around me? Am I taking care of my team? Am I taking care of the folks that I work with, and to my ability, and how are they contributing to that? But are we healthy? And staying grounded, as getting the right exercise, doing the meditation, all of that, to be grounded, to be able to not be an oak tree and get knocked over, but be the proverbial, what is it, the weeping willow. I can't even think of my trees right now. To be able to not get knocked over when the next, well, I talked about hurricanes before, so I guess hurricane comes through.
Well, just listening to your last words here, I think what I hear you demonstrating, and you can correct me, but you're demonstrating a level of empathy in terms of how we treat each other, both as people and as institutional capacity builders. And we are human after all,
Hmm.
and emotions are involved. There's no question about it.
And they're contagious. So
Yeah.
how can you, I guess I had a mentor once who talked about being, especially in conflict, and we're just kind of in conflict now, whether we want to be or not, with the polarized world that we're in. And she talked about being, as much as possible, a non-anxious presence in that. And so that's what I go back to. How can I bring a non-anxious presence as much as I can to any situation that I'm in?
Well, Carol, I want, before we wrap it up, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our many guests uh, the best way they can reach out to you if they want to find you, find your organizations, and discuss further the work that you do.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, so you're a podcast listener, so check out Nonprofit Mission Impact and find the episode where I talk to Michael, get his side of the story. And then you can find me at Grace Social Sector Consulting, gracesocialsector.com. And then you can find me and follow me on LinkedIn, although my name is pretty common, Carol Hamilton. So Carol Hamilton plus nonprofit mission impact or plus Grace Social Sector Consulting, you'll find me.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your knowledge with all of us today. I know from my own interactions with you that you have a lot to offer the association community, and I wish you well, and thank you again for being present.
Thank you.
Association Futures is a forward-thinking podcast that delves into the future of associations. Our mission is to help associations and their executives navigate the ever-evolving landscape by anticipating trends, avoiding short-sighted decisions, and ensuring long-term success. Tune in again in 2 weeks to gain insights, foresights, and actionable strategies for your association's journey. Thanks, friends, for being with us. Have a wonderful time.